Good evening, Azeroth, and welcome to episode 152 of the World of Goldcraft. As usual, I'm your host, the Lazy Goldmaker of thelazygoldmaker.com. Welcome back to the show, guys. So, still recording this offline as my wife is still on a cast, so we might try to do it live next week, but for now, we're recording this offline. So yeah, let's dive into the show. I have a couple of themes for you today. Two things we'll be talking about. One like major point about gold making, and then we'll talk a little bit about Classic Fresh before that. And lastly, we have a TBC Classic question from one of my patrons that we'll dive into a little bit. But first things first, Classic Fresh. Blizzard has announced, and they opened the beta for the Season of Mastery Classic Experience servers. And while I'm not personally particularly interested in playing Classic Fresh again, I'm sure that there are people out there who are very diehard Classic WoW or Vanilla WoW fans and they want to play, and the changes do seem to make it slightly more interesting in terms of the end game. So the main changes are, for those who are unaware, leveling is faster, primarily through the fact that the quest turn-ins give more experience, about 25% more. Raids are getting buffed a little bit in terms of difficulty, and they're removing world buffs from raids. That last one is going to increase their relative difficulty by a significant, much larger margin than any buffs they do, most likely. And they're also increasing the number of gathering nodes for professions. And that last one was, for anyone who played Classic, the number of nodes was way too low compared to the modern population they ran on those servers, and it led to a lot of very, very high material prices and quite expensive consumables. Now with world buffs being removed, it does mean that consumables are now more important than ever if you're raiding, if you're going to raid in the Classic Fresh experience. But they are going to be more available because it is going to be easier to farm them. And as anyone who played Classic will remember or raided in Classic, a lot of people raided with absolutely every consumable they could find back then. So I do think that consumables are just going to be slightly cheaper and easier to get for those people who care. It's also on a slightly faster cadence. They're planning for about 12 months from the first one, or from launch until the final phase. So I'm sure that those of you who are very interested in playing Classic again are going to dive back into it. A lot of the same gold making methods are probably going to work as long as there are enough people. As long as there's enough population, the same stuff will work. Material flipping will be great. If you can level fast early on and get like herbalism leveled and get into Fellwood and just farm before everyone else gets there, you can definitely make like a lot of gold. People did that. Plague Bloom, for instance, is a herb that will just go up in value very significantly once people hit max level and start eventually needing consumables. There's definitely a lot of investments like that you can make as well, and just try to look for items that aren't needed as much while leveling, but are going to be very, very much sought after once people start hitting level 60. I think a lot of stuff that goes into consumables is going to be in this category, and investing in those early on, it could be a nice little way to make some gold. So that's what I wanted to say about Classic Fresh. So what I wanted to talk about today is an overview of like how I view markets and my experience with different items and how useful or how good they are for gold making. Because as I made my TBC Gold Cap video this week, I talked a bit about the various markets that you can use or should use. And it's interesting to look at like why certain items are more profitable, why certain items are more expensive, what are the factors that drive these things, what are the factors that drive sale rate, or at least some of them, the most important ones in my opinion and experience. Because if you want to get richer, the richer you want to get, if you want to get better at gold making, then you need to prioritize items that give you a lot of gold back, which means a lot of raw profit, either per item or in total across a week, because you're selling a lot of items. That's generally what you want to look for. Now, if you want to maximize your efficiency, as I'm sure many of you want to do, then there are some things you need to focus on like that. Obviously, the raw amount of profit you can make from selling an item is very important, because the amount of time posting one item to the auction house takes the same amount of time, whether it's worth 100 gold or 1,000 gold or 10,000 gold. Now, of course, the sale rate is also going to have an effect, like how many times will you have to repost this item, or will you or should you cancel scan to sell this item at a fast enough pace. But it doesn't really matter, because if all else is equal, if the amount of reposts is equal, then you want the item to be as expensive as possible, even if you make a smaller profit margin. I've made this point so many times before, but it bears reiterating once again. 10k gold profit off of a 100,000 gold item, which means 10% profit margin, is objectively much better than selling a item for 1,500 gold that you paid 500 gold for, which is going to give you a 200% profit margin. The first case is better because you're making 10,000 gold rather than 1,000 gold. That's better, as long as you have enough gold to keep that 100,000 gold on the auction house. But profit per item isn't the be-all, end-all. It's not everything, because the sale rate is also an important factor here. The faster something sells, the less time you need to spend reposting it, running cancel scans and whatever, and you get your gold back so you can reinvest it. So something that sells quite slowly, like say transmog, 100,000 gold profit on a transmog item, is a lot less desirable than the 100,000 gold profits we were seeing on legendaries early on in Shadowlands, because the legendaries were selling really, really fast because everyone wanted to get them. Whereas transmog is like it sells every once in a while, at least in the expensive category, because there's a small number of people who care about those. So the expected time spent reposting is going to be higher for the transmog piece in this example. And this all ties into the motivations of people playing the game. The number one priority of players, in my experience, is player power. Everything else comes secondary to that, and that means that, well, there is a hierarchy of types of items in terms of how much people are willing to pay for them. So we're going to look at two things here. We're going to look at the two types of benefits, or the two main benefits that I think that drive why people buy items. And we're going to see how that and some other factors impact two things, and that's the sale rate, or the demand, like how quickly an item sells, and the price of an item. And we want to find items where the product of the sale rate and the price, say the sale rate times the price, or the sale rate times the raw profit, that's the number you want to increase, because that means that you're making tons of gold. So you want the item, the holy grail is obviously items with very high sale rates and very high profit per item. And those markets have existed. And they exist. And those are the ones you really want to get into if you want to get rich. Now, what do people care about in World of Warcraft? Well, generally they care about two things. The two main things people care about. They care about having their character become more powerful, and they care about having their character look cooler. Those are the main things. Like almost every gold making method I've ever known about or heard about fuels into one of those two needs. Or they are needed to get to something. So materials, for instance, are valuable because they can be used to make something that will make you either stronger or look cooler. And anything that does not contribute to anything that looks good or is valuable to an endgame character is generally not going to sell for that much. A typical example here is herbs from like old expansions. They're generally super cheap because they are mostly used in recipes to craft consumables that are no longer relevant. They don't give enough benefit, so no one cares about using them. So they're super, super cheap. So that's it. Now, first we'll take a look at what drives sale rate. And the sale rate for me mostly is driven by the difference between items that help increase player power and items that are for cosmetic reasons. Generally, high sale rate will always be items that provide player power. The more player power they provide, the higher the sale rate. pretty much, like all else being equal. People really, really, really care about having their characters do good damage, survive, whatever. It doesn't matter if they're hardcore raiders or not. It goes into any MMO. Like an MMO is, most MMOs are games about improving your character, making them stronger, making them do more damage. That's fun. That's a rewarding part of playing a persistent character type game like World of Warcraft. And that's it. People are willing to pay more gold, or they will buy more often items that increase player power. So in the subject of consumables, for instance, people will more often be buying flasks and DPS potions than they'll be buying utility potions. So generally speaking, like most people will probably use more potions of spectral intellect than they use potion of the hidden spirit, the invisibility potions. Unless they do an absolute ton of like very high M+ keys where potion skips are the norm, but that's a very, very elite echelon of players, or a very small group of players that are in that position. The same will true for gear, obviously. Gear that gives you relevant amount of stats, gear that is relevant in the current expansion content, will obviously sell a lot faster than items that are not, or items that only provide a cosmetic bonus. The other part, or the lower demand one, the lower demand side is generally going to be cosmetics in my experience. That's going to have lower sale rates because there are fewer people who care about any specific item. There's a subjectiveness here. People don't necessarily agree on what looks good or what the class fantasy that they want to make, or what the best transmog is. People are going to disagree on that. So people don't all want the same items, and it means that just demand is much more spread out, and also the fact that you need to have a good amount of gold to have something to splurge on cosmetics. So that's it. Now, if we take our focus away from the sale rate and over to what drives high prices or low prices, generally speaking, one area here is permanence, or whether or not something is gives you a temporary effect or not. So anything that what the main thing here is, there's one group of items, like almost everything that's ever been sold for more than 10,000 gold in the history of WoW are items that have a permanent benefit, or a benefit that lasts as long as you want it to. This includes mounts, battle pets, gear, enchants. These are the items that have been sold ever for a very large amount of gold, because they give you their full benefit for as long as you want to. In the case of enchants, you can overwrite them, but as long as you are using that weapon, then you keep that benefit. You keep them for as long as you want them to keep them, which means it's much easier to justify a large expense if you know you'll only have to do it once. There might be some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, like all of the best high-value markets in the game have been permanent, and the best ones have almost always been items that increase power, which means gear. That's been the holy grail of gold making. For many people will remember BOE flipping from Legion or BFA, which was absolutely incredible. Legendaries right now is the other example of like the absolute top echelon of gold making methods, because it's items that increase player power and items that are permanent. Then on the other hand, we have stuff like that gives temporary effects. Prime example here, consumables, flasks, potions, all that stuff. People are generally not going to pay that much for that, because they know they have to buy it again. So it needs to be something that they can afford to buy on a week in, week out basis, and not something that they can farm up for once, like a legendary piece, for instance, which they can justify by buying a token for once or farming for once and then being done with it for the main part of the expansion. So this is the main thing. There are obviously other factors at play. Another one is rarity, rarity encompasses more than just rarity. It can be the drop rate of a specific item. It can also be, for a crafted item, the amount of time required to get all of the resources, which isn't exactly rarity, but rarity is really just something that means that it takes a lot of time and effort to acquire the item. So that's the same thing for why legendaries are expensive, for instance. They are very, very good items that provide a lot of power. they're permanent, and they take a lot of resources to craft. A lot. It's multiple. It's like 5 to 10 hours. It was a lot of hours back in the day to farm for a farm enough callous hides, for instance, for a leatherworking legendaries. That was the reason why these items were selling for like 300,000 gold back at the beginning of Shadowlands. I'm sure there are other things as well that play in here, but we're just keeping this on a high level to help you sort of understand, like, okay, what kind of items are going to be the good ones. And this holds true across most other MMOs or most other games that have a similar player trading as World of Warcraft. Players are mostly looking to get stronger, get better at the game, or look cooler in the game. And any items that help them do that, that's the items that they're going to prioritize their resources to. So that's it. This is my high level approach. This is how I think about gold making, how I think when I go into a new expansion. I'm looking for power increasing items. I'm looking for stuff that's relevant at max level. It gives a permanent power increase. That's going to be where the big money is. It has been where the biggest money has been in Legion, BFA, and Shadowlands. All 3 expansions, top end or max level, high quality gear that people use for raiding has been the most profitable market to be in, and I'm expecting that as long as those kinds of markets exist, then they will remain the best ones for gold making. So that lastly, I have a quick question from one of my patrons, which is TBC Classic related. Why are the old materials selling quickly in TBC? And the answer is quite simple. Players are still leveling classic professions. It's that simple. Whether this is on alts or new players, we don't really know. It doesn't really matter. Either way, anyone who's looking to make a new level 70 character and optimize them in TBC Classic, they'll have to level their classic professions. Because there's direct benefits, such as the ring enchants that only enchanters get, and all of the BOP crafted gear. There's a ton of BOP crafted gear. So if you're rolling a caster, then you want tailoring. And that means that classic materials still sell really well. And that's going to remain so forever, effectively. Because there's always people re-rolling or new people coming into the game. Always. You might think that, oh, but everyone started at launch who wanted to. No, that's not the case. In my experience, always there are people coming, rolling a new alt, or new people coming in. Catch-up gear is one of the most consistent ways to make gold. I've been using catch-up markets for a very, very long time. Anything that players can buy directly at max level to boost their performance sells really, really well. People definitely want to skip progression steps that they've done before. If you've done like the heroic grind once, you want to speed it up as much as possible and just like buy as much gear as possible so you can blast through heroics. And not waste your time. And that's why the classic materials still sell. So yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this week's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show. I really, really appreciate it. With that, I wish you all a profitable week, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.